Greetings and welcome. I Love Iodine here with another video in my video series on intestinal parasites. This video is going to cover the definition of parasites as well as discuss some of the common types of intestinal parasites. If you are new to my channel, please take a moment to look at the other topics that are included in this video series, and you will find these videos in the playlist. We need to talk about intestinal parasites. This is something that's very serious. This is very commonly overlooked by most Western medical doctors. Just speaking from my own experience, I was infected with a fish tapeworm for over a decade. About year 5, I started developing symptoms. I sought medical care. No doctor ever mentioned parasites as being a potential cause. All I was getting was treatment for my symptoms. So I eventually got diagnosed with subclinical hypothyroidism. I was diagnosed with many other things that you can actually listen to me discuss in other videos. And it turns out that once I got rid of the parasite and the tapeworms, I was able to reverse all of these without pharmaceutical help. I take no pharmaceuticals at this time. And it's clear that all of these things like hypothyroidism can easily be caused by malnutrition. I wasn't getting my nutrients because the parasites were actually eating my food. Once you look at it from that perspective, it becomes very clear how this works. So let's go on and define what a parasite is. A parasite is a plant or animal that lives upon or within another living organism at whose expense it obtains some advantage. Parasites include multicelled and single-celled animals, fungi, and bacteria. And some authorities also include viruses. Those that feed upon human hosts can cause diseases ranging from the mildly annoying to the severe or even fatal. We're going to be focusing on the multicelled and single-celled animals. We're not going to be discussing fungi or bacteria. We're only going to be focusing on those. And I will say that there is some conflicting reports out there that worms can be beneficial for your health. I am going to completely disagree with that. It is not a way to effectively diet. I know that some people are saying that hookworms can help with celiac disease. I think if you want to help with celiac disease, treat your parasites, and you might be surprised if your gluten intolerance might actually be reversed much quicker than you could ever expect. I was also diagnosed with gluten intolerance and told I was likely celiac. Now that I got rid of my tapeworm, I can eat gluten, I can eat anything. I was sensitive to all kinds of foods, and that's all been reversed. So let's take some time to look at some common parasites. We have a picture of a fluke, a hookworm, a roundworm, a tapeworm, a nematode, and protozoa. The one thing I want to note, I didn't put this picture together, but hookworms and roundworms and nematodes, they're actually in the same family. Nematodes and roundworms are actually synonyms for each other, so you'll hear them called both. And there's just to be aware of that. And if you look at the flukes and the tapeworms, they're actually in the same family and they're called flatworms. We'll discuss that in a little greater detail. And of course, we have the protozoan parasites, which we're going to talk about next. Here are some pictures of some common parasites that can live in the human intestine. We have different types of roundworms, hookworms, we have nematodes. The reason I'm talking about those first is because those are actually very similar, and you'll hear roundworm called nematode. They're actually synonymous, so just be mindful of that. We really don't need to know all the names of all the species. It's pretty irrelevant. We definitely know that with the roundworms, there's 25,000 known species of roundworms or nematodes. Half of them are known to be parasitic. Clearly, we can't learn all their names. And then we have various types of flukes, we have different types of tapeworms, and we have different types of protozoan parasites. There are two main types of parasites that can live in the human intestines. We have protozoan parasites and we have helminths. Helminths are just a fancy word for parasitic worms. So let's talk about the protozoan parasites. Protozoa are microscopic one-celled organisms. They can live in your intestines, your blood, or any of your organs. In the intestines, they're transmitted either orally or through a fecal route. So to give an example of a protozoan parasite that's transmitted orally, we can just think about Giardia. Giardia lamblia is actually acquired by drinking contaminated water or eating foods that have been actually in contact with contaminated water. So there's one. So let's think about one that we can acquire through a fecal route. Well, we don't actually have to go much further than our cat's litter box. Cats transmit Toxoplasma gondii. Cats walk in their litter box, they walk all over the house. We can also become infected if we change the cat's litter box. It is well known that if a woman is pregnant, she's instructed by her doctor not to change the cat's litter box during her pregnancy, because with Toxoplasma gondii, it can infect the fetus and it can cause fetal death, it can cause microcephaly, and it can cause other birth defects. Toxoplasma gondii, according to the World Health Organization, infects 30 to 50% of the world population. And I have recently encountered in some research that 10 to 15% of the US population is estimated to be latently infected with Toxoplasma gondii. This is a very serious protozoan parasite that people really need to consider, because it has been linked to Crohn's disease, it has been linked to schizophrenia, aggressive behavior, suicidal tendencies, bipolar disorder. It has been linked to seizures and other neurological problems. So if you're having any of those symptoms and your doctor hasn't addressed possibly a parasitic infection, please do discuss this information with your doctor. In these videos, I do have citations and I have information on actual research that's been done showing this. So if you need that information, please watch the videos, please download that information and take it to your doctor so they can see firsthand that this is in fact research supported. So the other way that protozoan parasites can be transmitted is by an arthropod vector like a mosquito. So these are going to be your blood parasites. Let's think about an example of that. We know that malaria is caused by a protozoan parasite that is transmitted to humans by a mosquito. So there's one. We also have West African sleeping sickness and East African sleeping sickness. They're actually two distinct diseases that are caused by the tsetse fly. One is a chronic condition and the other is an acute condition, neither of which we want to get. And there's many, many others, but those are just a few examples. So now we're going to talk about the parasitic worms. This is something I know very well because of personal experience. These helminths, these are the large multicellular organisms, and these are often visible by the naked eye. Even though they're visible by the naked eye, that doesn't mean you're ever going to see them if you're infected. I clearly had tons of them, but I will tell you one thing. I was not actually checking out what was occurring in the toilet after I was done. I would go to the restroom, I'd hit the flush button, and move on with my day. So unless you're actually really investigating what you're doing in the bathroom, you're not going to see any segments. If you did, you might just think, oh, that must have been a seed or something of that nature that I ate, and it just didn't digest well. There was no way I was going to think that I had worms. That would have been, that's the furthest thing from my mind at that time. So anyway, there's so many different types of parasitic worms. They can be almost microscopic, just maybe a few millimeters big, to the 30-foot fish tapeworm. I want to make a note. There are some websites out there that say that the tapeworms can be 85 feet long. Well, that is true, but those are not the tapeworms that actually are in humans. Our intestines are not that long. I guess the tapeworm that could be that long, maybe you'll find that in a giraffe or in some other mammal, maybe an elephant. But we don't have that type. There's only a certain types of tapeworms that can actually live inside the human. There are other tapeworms and other parasites that live in different mammals. Now, of course, there's a lot of crossover. We can get the same tapeworms that our cats and dogs can get. And we can obviously, we eat pork, we can get the pork tapeworm, we eat beef, we get the beef tapeworm, and so on and so forth. But here you see there's whipworms, pinworms, threadworms. We have different types of roundworms. We have guinea worms. So just keep in mind that there are many different types. So in a lot of ways, I don't really concern myself in too much detail of the types. If you are infected with worms, most of the same herbs and foods are going to be able to kill most of them. And that's the same thing with the pharmaceuticals. A lot of those are broad spectrum, and they're going to be able to handle most varieties or most species of worms. So if we look at the helminths in a little more detail, we have different categories that they can be grouped into. We have flatworms, and the flatworms are going to include your flukes and your tapeworms. We have a category that is the thorny-headed worms, and the adult form of this worm will reside in your gastrointestinal tract. We also have a class of roundworms, and like I've already said, there's 25,000 known species of roundworms. but they estimate that there's actually 1 million. So that means there's 975,000 that they haven't even identified. And if we know that half of the roundworms that have been identified are parasitic, we can extrapolate that to say, well, maybe 500,000 of the roundworms out there are parasitic. But of course, that's just an extrapolation. But we definitely know there's 12,000 plus at this present moment. And these worms, there's so many different species and varieties. They're also called the nematodes. And the adult form of these worms can live in your gastrointestinal tract. There's also roundworms that can live in your blood, so clearly those are very, very small. They can live in your lymphatic system, and they can live in your subcutaneous tissue. That could be like under your skin, in between your muscles. Roundworms can be acquired for many different ways. They can be acquired from meat, but they can also be contaminated. You can get it from walking on contaminated soil. We're going to discuss further in this video some of the ways that we can acquire tapeworms and other protozoan parasites and other worms, because we need to know how to get them so we can learn how to avoid them. So let's look at the category of flatworms. It breaks down into trematodes and cestodes. Your trematodes are your flukes, and your cestodes are your tapeworms. And the reason that I talk about these a lot, or these are what I personally had. So I got to learn about these types very intimately. So if we look at the trematodes, we'll see that flukes, there can be intestinal flukes, liver flukes, lung flukes, and blood flukes. And there's different varieties and species of all of these. So in the future, I may be covering these more in depth, but right now we're just going to keep this at a high level. So we have the cestodes, and these are your tapeworms. We have different varieties of tapeworms. We have the pork and beef tapeworm. We have fish tapeworms. We have cat and dog tapeworms. And then we have this other category. We'll get more into detail in those types. We have the dwarf tapeworm, we have Spirometra, and we have a few other ones that can inhabit the human intestine. I was just reading today about the fox tapeworm. So even though it's rare, it's supposed to be really serious because most of the medication that exists actually cannot kill it. So we just need to be mindful of that there's many, many, many different varieties and species of tapeworms. So let's just briefly go over what are the impacts on health. Some people will say that intestinal parasites could be healthy. I disagree. Parasites in this fashion are sucking your food and they're toxifying your body. So let's talk about that more in detail. We know that parasitic infections are a serious health concern and can be deadly. Parasites release toxins and excrete metabolic waste, causing our organs, such as our liver and kidneys, to be overburdened. Parasites steal nutrients that cause numerous negative health issues by leaving us nutritionally deficient. Another main issue that parasites can actually cause is some parasites, like the pork tapeworm, can have larval cysts that travel throughout your body. So the eggs travel, they form cysts, and these parasites stop there. They'll live in your brain, they can live in your eye, they can live in your organs. These larval cysts may be mistaken for cancerous tumors. That is a very, very big concern. And these larval cysts can also cause obstructions that interfere with normal bodily functions. To give an example of that, we'll talk about the pork tapeworm. It causes a condition called cysticercosis. So what this is where the cysts are at different parts of the body, and say they're in your liver. Well, clearly, if you have cysts throughout your liver, it's going to interfere with the functions. If you have the cyst in your eyes, that's going to cause issues with your eye functioning and can lead to blindness. If these cysts actually end up in your brain, which they tend to do, they seem to like it there because of the high nutrients and the fact that they can, maybe they get lost and can't find their way out. I'm not sure, but it's actually quite frightening. And that condition is called neurocysticercosis. And according to the CDC, 1 in 10 people that's hospitalized for neurocysticercosis actually ends up dying. Now, this is a preventable parasitic infection, and we're going to talk about ways that we can prevent it. But first off, we need to discuss more about how we can acquire it. But I'll just give you a little word of advice. If you're eating pork, make sure you're thoroughly cooking it. So let's talk about how we acquire them. Consuming raw or undercooked meat or fish. This includes sushi, sashimi, ceviche, smoked meats and fish, raw oysters, etc. If you are eating any of these, make sure you know what you're doing. If you're eating fish, you need to freeze it before you actually eat it raw. There's guidelines on the CDC website. I get into more detail of that in other videos. Also, if you're eating beef, or pork that is undercooked, you are absolutely putting yourself at risk for parasitic infections, because freezing the beef and the pork does not eliminate the parasitic eggs. That does work for the fish tapeworm, but that does not kill the beef and the pork tapeworms. You can also get it from fresh fruits and vegetables that are not properly washed. We've already discussed that you can get Giardia from plants that have been contaminated with water that is infected with Giardia, but you can also get numerous ones. Think about the wild pigs that are wandering through the fields and they're defecating on the crops. If you're not washing that off, you can actually ingest the eggs that way. If we look at some of the areas where wild pigs are common, we'll see that parasitic infections are just rampant. The WHO has a really nice map that talks about the pork tapeworm and the infections where it's actually quite a problem, and that's actually in one of my other videos. But you can definitely look that up if you're interested. Another way we can get them is we can reinfect ourselves. Now, this is much more common with the pork tapeworm, because the pork tapeworm infection can be spread not just by eating undercooked pork, but it can be by coming into contact with the feces of an infected pig or the feces of an infected human. Not all tapeworms and parasites can be transmitted that way, but unfortunately the pork tapeworm, it seems to like to get around. So if you actually know you have a pork tapeworm, make sure that you practice proper hygiene. If you don't know you have a pork tapeworm, you could be inadvertently reinfecting yourself. Say you go to the restroom and you get a little fecal matter on your hands, you didn't properly wash your hands, and somehow along the way you eat with your hands or you bite your nails, you could be reinfecting yourself. So we can get this pork tapeworm from contact with someone who's infected. So if someone's working at a restaurant and they don't practice proper hygiene after they go to the restroom, they can in fact infect us by preparing our food, and then we eat the food that they have contaminated. We can also become infected by shaking their hand and it being transmitted, us not realizing that we need to wash our hands immediately, and then maybe we go eat, or maybe we bite our nails, or in some other way. So, and of course, person-to-person contact, we can get infected with parasites if we are having certain intimate encounters with someone who's infected. I'll let you use your imagination. Also, another way that we can get infected is person to object to person contact. So if we're touching contaminated surfaces and then eating with our hands or biting our nails. So these are definitely things to take into consideration. So here's some other ways we can actually contract parasites. By eating out, eating at salad bars, buffets, restaurants with poor sanitation practices. Employees with parasitic infections that have poor hygiene can also transmit parasitic infections. So let's just take a look at a salad bar. This is a recent picture that I took at a salad bar at a store that I normally go to. And actually, I usually eat there. I was really not wanting to eat there on this day. As you see, all the tongs are laying in the food. So if someone had just come through and was infected with parasites and hadn't washed their hands and had fecal matter on their hands, now it's on the tongs. Now the tongs are laying in the food, so now it's on the food. So even if you replace the tongs, well, now you have the contaminated food. And of course with salad, we're going to eat it raw, we're going to eat it right there. And so I'm trying to steer clear of eating at salad bars at this point. I think I know too much to feel safe in doing so. So anyway, that's just something to consider, that this is a big, big problem. So another way that we can contract parasites is from our pets. I've mentioned how Toxoplasma gondii is spread from cats, but we can also get tapeworms from dogs and cats. We can get roundworms from them as well. Now remember, what do we do when we take our dogs and cats to the vet? We take a stool sample in, they find out if they have worms, and if they do, they give them a treatment, and everything's good. Except for, wait a second, we're living in the same house with our animals. What if we're infected, and we've now treated our dogs and cats, so they're good to go, except for, now what if we give them back to the animals? So we're causing a cycle. So if you do have dogs and cats and you're deworming them, it would only make sense you'd want to deworm yourself at the same time, just in case. And if you know that you have a parasitic infection, you want to do your take care of your animals at the same time as well, because you want everybody in your house to be on the same page. Another way we can become infected is by changing diapers of a baby that's infected. Of course, we're going to mention cleaning a cat's litter box again. So again, we're going to go back to walking barefoot. I had mentioned before that if you're walking on contaminated soil, and especially if you have a cut on your foot, you can actually have those eggs go up through your skin and travel through your body, and those roundworms can end up just about anywhere. Another easy way to acquire parasitic infections is swimming in pools or other contaminated waters. I'm not saying all pools are contaminated, but it only begs, let's just think about it for a second. If you have someone in the water who didn't wipe themselves properly, and now they're infected with a parasite, that obviously is going to break up in the water, and you're going to have those parasitic eggs floating in the water. You're not going to necessarily see them, and say you're swimming and big water splashes in your face and you accidentally swallow some of the water, or say you're swimming and you accidentally swallow water in another way. You can become infected with parasites. Another way is through your open skin. So if you have a cut or something like that and there's parasitic eggs, they can actually get in through the broken skin. So just be very careful of that. There's been a lot of cases throughout the years of nearby waters, lakes, that they actually had to shut down beaches, they had to shut down lakes because of the fact that the bacterial load was too high, or that there was actually fecal matter in the water. Another case, and another way you can get them, is by drinking tap water. So this is proving that chlorine doesn't kill all parasitic larvae and cysts in the eggs. In 1993, a parasite in Milwaukee's drinking water allegedly killed 69 people and sickened over 400,000. I've been reading lately that the number was 100, but we're just going to stick with 69 because it's a lower number, and I want to be optimistic that less people actually died. If I'm not mistaken, this parasite was a protozoan parasite called Cryptosporidium. So keep that in mind, that your tap water is definitely not safe. You want to actually get a filter that can filter out parasitic cyst. Okay? So I'm going to read the parasitic information from the CDC so you don't think I just made this stuff all up. All right, so here we go. Numerous parasites can be transmitted by food, including many protozoa and helminths. In the United States, the most common foodborne parasites are protozoa, such as Cryptosporidium, Giardia, Cyclospora, and Toxoplasma gondii. Roundworms such as Trichinella and Anisakis, and tapeworms such as Diphyllobothrium and Tinea. Many of the organisms can also be transmitted by water, soil, or person-to-person contact. Occasionally in the United States, but often in developing countries, a wide variety of helminthic roundworms, tapeworms, and flukes are transmitted in foods such as undercooked fish, crabs and mollusks, undercooked meat, raw aquatic plants such as watercress, raw vegetables that have been contaminated by human or animal feces. Some foods are contaminated by food service workers who practice poor hygiene or who work in unsanitary facilities. Symptoms of foodborne parasitic infections vary greatly depending on the type of parasite. Protozoa such as Cryptosporidium, Giardia, and Cyclospora most commonly cause diarrhea and other gastrointestinal symptoms. Helminthic infections can cause abdominal pain, diarrhea, muscle pain, cough, skin lesions, malnutrition, weight loss, neurological, and many other symptoms depending on the particular organism and burden of infection. Treatment is available for most of the foodborne parasitic organisms. You can go to the CDC website. That's actually, the link is right there. So I want to discuss something. One of the symptoms, or one of the things that helminthic infections can cause, is malnutrition. If we are not getting our nutrients, our body is going to suffer. If we're not getting our iodine, if we're not getting our copper, our selenium, our thyroid will not function properly. This can cause hypothyroidism. If we are not getting enough calcium and other trace minerals to support our bones are going to become brittle. If we are not getting enough nutrients throughout the body, we're not going to be able to produce hormones. That can lead to infertility, that can lead to low testosterone. We need these essential nutrients to be able to build everything that we need for our body to function properly. So that's why malnutrition can cause so many other symptoms. If we look at the fish tapeworm, for example, I get into greater detail in another video on this, but it causes a B12 deficiency, and it can lead to an anemia that's caused by a lack of B12. Please look at the symptoms that can be caused by a B12 deficiency. It is very, very serious. So if you are suffering from anemia, whether it be iron or B12, you absolutely need to consider being tested for parasites. As I've stated, we can get parasites anywhere. We come into contact with them every single day. So we need to have some solutions. First off, we need to eliminate any existing infections and ward off future exposures. Another key thing we need to do is we need to get our body healthy and strong, because if our body is healthy, we're better able to eliminate existing infections and not allow further infections to occur. I want to say something about Toxoplasma gondii with respect to this. Toxoplasma gondii, we've mentioned, is the protozoan parasite that we can get from coming into contact with the feces of cats. Well, this parasite can actually go into a dormant state, and it will wait until you are immune compromised before it actually activates itself. So just think about that. These things are so opportunistic that they will wait it out. They're quite patient because they are going to make sure that they have the best chance of survival. So if you can keep your body healthy and strong, that Toxoplasma gondii that you might have a latent infection of is never ever going to manifest. So the other thing, again, we have to heal and strengthen the host. Our immune system needs to be functioning well in order to do what it was designed to do. Your body is a self-healing machine. When you get a cut, you don't have to tell your body to fix it. It knows what to do. We need to have a healthy microbiome. We have learned in recent years that a healthy microbiome is essential for a properly functioning immune system. It has been stated that approximately 70% of our immune system is actually in our gut. We now know that a lot of the neurotransmitters that we need for a good stable mood and for other things are actually produced in our gut. So we need to be consuming fermented foods, and we need to be avoiding antibiotics whenever possible. Also, we need to consume anti-parasitic foods and herbs, and we need to avoid or limit the foods that feed parasites. So if you check in my other videos, I go into great detail about the foods that are naturally anti-parasitic. I'll give you one right now, garlic. So everybody's familiar with that one. And of course, we go into detail on the herbs. Some of those are more specific for short-term use, but some of them are something that you can incorporate into your lifestyle on a regular basis. And as you might expect, what are the foods that feed the parasites? Sugar, sweet foods, refined foods, junk food. So everything you really don't need anyway. All foods that are healthy are things that they don't like. So give up the sodas, give up the potato chips, give up the greasy fried fatty foods, and give up the sugar and the sweets, and you'll be doing yourself a favor in more ways than one. So I want to thank you. I love you. Thank you for listening. I hope that my story is being able to be of a great benefit to you. All right, this has been wonderful. I'm really happy to be able to be doing this. I'm happy that my experience is going to be able to provide some insight and benefit for you that are listening. If you haven't subscribed and you would like to subscribe, I would greatly appreciate it. If you would like to be notified when I put up a new video, just click the little bell and you'll get a notification. If you like this video, please hit the like button. And if you'd like to share it with someone who you think would be interested or could be of assistance to, please feel free to do that as well. I appreciate it. I want to say thank you. I'm very grateful that you took the time to listen to my video. And there, in closing, is a picture of sushi. This is how I got my fish tapeworm, so I have to have a little bit of comic relief sometimes and just have to laugh at my folly. So this is a picture that I took when I was in Boston, and this was at just a random food court, and I thought, oh my goodness, sushi is just too popular, and we really need to be careful where we're getting it from. That being said, I'm not discouraging anybody from eating anything. Just make sure that you are getting it from a place that you trust, making sure that they're actually following the guidelines and protocols set forth by the CDC on how to make sure that you can prevent a parasitic infection. Again, I thank you very much. Have a great day.